plumber fixes millionaire's daughter's wheelchair, and it changes his life. Michael Johnson looked out the window of his small apartment in Manhattan as the landlord knocked on the door, demanding the 3 months of overdue rent. His calloused hands held the eviction notice that had arrived that morning, and he knew he had only 48 hours to scrape together $5,000 or lose the only home his family had ever known. That's when the phone rang. A frantic voice on the other end explained there was an emergency in Beverly Hills, at one of the neighborhood's most luxurious mansions. The homeowner's daughter's wheelchair had broken during her morning physical therapy, and the girl was inconsolable. All the specialized technicians were either busy or couldn't arrive before the weekend. "Sir, I'll pay whatever it takes, but it has to be now," the desperate voice said. "My daughter hasn't stopped crying since the chair locked up." Michael hesitated for a moment. He was a plumber, not a medical equipment technician. But the urgency in the man's voice and the promise of generous payment made him agree. He packed his tools into the old van and set off across the city, praying he could fix the problem. The mansion's gate opened automatically when he identified himself through the intercom. The garden was enormous, with royal palms lining the entrance and a fountain at the center. He had never seen so much wealth concentrated in one place. The house had 3 floors and looked like a luxury hotel. A poised woman in her 50s greeted him at the door. Her graying hair was pulled into a flawless bun, and she wore a discreet but clearly expensive pantsuit. "Are you the technician?" she asked, eyeing his paint-stained blue uniform and the tools he carried. "I'm Michael, ma'am. I'm here about the wheelchair." "I'm Barbara, personal assistant to Mr. Richard Thompson. Please follow me. The situation is quite complicated." As they walked through hallways decorated with paintings and sculptures, Barbara explained that little Emily was only 3 years old and relied entirely on her specialized chair. The girl had been born with a condition that affected her movement, and any disruption to her routine left her deeply distressed. "She's been crying for over 2 hours, Barbara said, stopping in front of double doors. "Mr. Thompson is beside himself. He's called every supplier in Los Angeles, but no one can deliver a new one before Monday." Michael took a deep breath before entering the room. It was spacious and bright, with large windows overlooking the garden. In the center, a small blonde girl sat in a modern wheelchair, softly crying. A tall man in a dark suit paced back and forth, shouting into his phone. "No, I won't accept that excuse," the man yelled. "Don't you understand? My daughter needs this chair working." The girl wore a beige dress and clutched a stuffed teddy bear. Tears streamed down her flushed cheeks as she tried unsuccessfully to move the chair. The wheels were locked in an odd position, and the adjustment mechanism made a metallic noise whenever she tried to shift. Michael approached slowly, kneeling beside the wheelchair. The girl stopped crying for a moment and studied him curiously. "Hi, princess," he said with a gentle smile. "My name's Michael. I'm here to look at your chair. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us newcomers a lot. Now, back to the story." Emily didn't respond but watched closely as he began examining the wheelchair's mechanisms. It was an imported model with multiple automated functions and an electronic adjustment system. The problem seemed to be with the motor controlling the seat's tilt. "Can I take a look underneath?" asked Michael, showing a small screwdriver. The girl nodded, still holding her teddy bear. Michael began working carefully, removing a side panel from the chair. The man on the phone finally hung up and approached. "Who are you?" he asked in a rough voice. "Michael Johnson, sir. I came to fix your daughter's chair." "Are you a certified medical equipment technician?" "No, sir, I'm a plumber, but I understand engines and mechanisms." The man laughed scornfully. "A plumber? Barbara, what kind of joke is this? My daughter is not an experiment for just anyone to tinker with." "Mr. Thompson," Barbara intervened, "all the technicians are busy. He was the only one who agreed to come today." "Richard Thompson?" Michael repeated, looking up from his work. "Yes, and whoever you are, you can leave. I won't let a plumber touch my daughter's chair." The name echoed in Michael's mind like a punch to the gut. Richard Thompson. The same Richard Thompson who had fired his father, Robert Johnson, 20 years ago from the construction company where he worked as an engineer. The same man who had destroyed his family with false accusations of stealing materials. Michael's hands trembled slightly as he continued inspecting the chair. His father had spent the last years of his life trying to clear his name, but never found another job in the field. He worked as a night watchman until he fell ill, always repeating that one day the truth would come out. "Daddy, why did that man do this to us?" Michael had asked so many times as a teenager. "Son, sometimes people do bad things out of fear or greed, but life has its ways of setting things right." Now, 20 years later, he was in the home of the man who had destroyed his family. Richard hadn't recognized him, but Michael remembered that face perfectly. Older, with a few grey hairs, but it was definitely him. "I found the problem," said Michael, pulling out a small screw that had come loose and jammed the mechanism. "It's just a matter of repositioning this part here." Emily watched every move intently. When Michael tested the motor and heard the smooth sound of the mechanism working again, she clapped her hands. "There you go, Princess. Shall we test it?" He showed her how to use the control buttons. The chair tilted gently back and then returned to its normal position. Emily laughed for the first time since he'd arrived. "It works!" she exclaimed, moving the chair around the room. Richard stood speechless. In 15 minutes, this plumber had solved a problem that the best technicians in Los Angeles couldn't fix before Monday. "How much do I owe you?" he asked, already pulling out his checkbook. Michael looked at the girl happily playing with her chair and then at Richard. For a moment, all the anger he'd carried for 20 years surged up. That man had taken everything from his family. His father had lost his dignity, his career, and spent years being seen as dishonest in the neighborhood. But then, he looked at Emily again. She was just an innocent child, like he had been when his world fell apart. She wasn't to blame for her father's mistakes. "I won't charge anything," said Michael, putting away his tools. "What do you mean?" asked Richard, surprised. "I don't charge to see a child happy." Barbara watched everything with a strange expression. She had worked at Richard's company for over 20 years and knew all the former employees. There was something familiar about that man in the blue uniform. "Mr. Michael," she said, "may I ask your full name?" "Johnson. Michael Robert Johnson." Barbara's face went pale. She remembered Robert Johnson perfectly, the brilliant engineer who had been unfairly fired by Richard. At the time, she was just a junior secretary, but she knew the truth about the case. There were documents proving Robert's innocence, but Richard had hidden everything to protect the real culprit, who was his own nephew. "Was Robert Johnson your father?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Yes, ma'am. He passed away 5 years ago." Richard sensed the tension in the air. "Barbara, did you know this man?" "Mr. Thompson, I think we need to talk later." Michael said goodbye to Emily, who insisted on giving him a kiss on the cheek. "Will you come back to play with me?" she asked. "If your daddy allows it, Princess." On the way back to Manhattan, Michael couldn't stop thinking about the encounter. Fate had brought him face to face with the man who had ruined his family. But at the same time, there was an innocent child caught in the middle of it all. When he got home, his wife Jennifer was in the kitchen preparing dinner. She was 6 months pregnant with their second child, and her belly was already quite noticeable. Her brown hair was tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore a faded blue dress that no longer fit properly. "How was work today?" she asked, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Different," Michael replied, hugging her from behind. "Did you get the rent money?" Michael sighed. In his hurry to leave, he had completely forgotten to collect payment, and now that he knew who Richard was, he felt even more confused. "No, honey, I didn't charge them." "What do you mean?" "Michael, you know we need that money." I know, but it was a special case, you see. A little 3-year-old girl in a wheelchair. I just couldn't charge her." Jennifer sighed and sat down in the kitchen chair. "Your heart is bigger than your wallet, my love, but the landlord won't accept our hearts as payment." That night, Michael barely slept. He kept thinking about his father, the injustice they had suffered, and the innocent little girl who had won his heart in just a few minutes. Should he tell Jennifer who Richard Thompson really was? The next morning, the phone rang early. It was Barbara. "Mr. Michael, little Emily has been asking for you. She said she wants to show you a drawing she made. Could you come back here today?" I don't know if that's a good idea, Mum. Please, she hasn't stopped talking about the uncle who fixed her chair, and I'd like to speak with you about your father. Michael looked at Jennifer, who was drinking coffee with a worried expression. They only had a few hours left before the rent was due. All right, I'll go. When he arrived at the mansion, Emily was in the garden with a nurse. The moment she saw him, she squealed with joy and wheeled her chair toward him. Uncle Michael! Uncle Michael! Look what I made for you. She handed him a crayon drawing. There were two figures, a tall one in blue and a small one next to a black chair. Below, with someone's help, it read, "Thank you." "It's beautiful, Princess," Michael said, genuinely moved. Barbara approached. "Mr. Michael, Mr. Thompson would like to speak with you in his office." Richard's office took up half of the mansion's second floor. The walls were lined with shelves full of books and business trophies. Behind an enormous mahogany desk, Richard sat reading some papers. "Sit down," he said without looking up. Michael sat in the leather chair across from the desk. The silence lasted for a few uncomfortable seconds. "Barbara told me who you are," Richard finally said, "or rather who your father was." "So?" "I wanted you to know I hold no grudges against former employees. What happened to your father was necessary at the time." "Necessary?" Michael felt the blood rush to his head. "My father was innocent. He was caught with construction materials at home. We had to make a decision. He took those materials because his nephew asked him to. My father said that 1,000 times, but no one would listen." Richard finally looked up from the papers. "Water under the bridge, kid, but I have a proposal for you. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now back to the story." Michael waited in silence. "Emily has taken a liking to you, and I must admit you've shown impressive skill with delicate equipment. I want to hire you to oversee the maintenance of all her medical devices. I'm not a certified technician, but you have skilled hands and my daughter likes you. That's worth more than any diploma. I'll pay $5,000 a month plus health insurance for your family." Michael was stunned. $5,000 a month was more than he made as a freelance plumber, and the health insurance would be a lifesaver for Jennifer and the baby on the way. "Why are you doing this?" "Because my daughter smiled for the first time in weeks after you fixed her wheelchair, and because maybe it's time to right some past wrongs. And if I accept, will I have to work directly with you? Most of the time, you'll be handling Emily's equipment. Your contact with me will be minimal." Michael thought of Jennifer, pregnant and worried about bills. He thought of the eviction notice waiting at home. He thought of the baby coming soon, and he thought of Emily, the sweet little girl who had drawn a picture for him. "I accept," he finally said. "Great. Barbara will handle the contract details. You can start Monday." When Michael shared the news with Jennifer, she cried with relief. $5,000 with health insurance?" she repeated, disbelieving. "Thank God, my love." "There's just one thing," Michael said. "The boss is Richard Thompson." "Who?" "The man who unfairly fired my father 20 years ago." Jennifer grew serious. "And you're going to work for him?" "I'm working for his daughter. It's different." Over the weekend, Michael researched everything about children's medical equipment. He wanted to be prepared so he wouldn't let Emily down. He also talked to some fellow plumbers about small engines and electronic systems. Monday morning, Barbara greeted him with a printed contract and an employee badge. "Welcome to the team," she said with a sad smile. "Your father would be proud of you." "Did you know my father well?" "Robert was one of the best employees we ever had. An honest, hard-working man. What happened to him was a terrible injustice." "So you know he was innocent?" Barbara hesitated before answering. "I know many things, Mr. Michael, but some truths are complicated to share." Emily was in her room when Michael arrived. The space was decorated with princess themes, but also filled with medical equipment. Besides the wheelchair, there was an adapted treadmill, a suspension system for exercises, and several other devices he didn't recognize. "Uncle Michael," she shouted when she saw him. "Are you working here now?" "Yes, Princess, I'll be taking care of all your equipment." And will you play with me too? Of course, whenever I can. In the first few days, Michael settled into a routine. He arrived early, checked all the equipment, performed necessary maintenance, and stayed with Emily during her physical therapy sessions. The little girl was always more cooperative when he was around. Emily's physical therapist was a young woman named Melissa. She found it odd that a plumber was handling medical equipment, but she couldn't deny everything worked perfectly since he'd taken over. "Where did you study this type of equipment?" she asked one day. "Actually, I learned from my father. He knew a lot about mechanics and electronics." "Was your father a physical therapist?" "He was an engineer." During the sessions, Michael observed carefully how each piece of equipment worked and how Emily reacted to them. He began making small notes about possible improvements. Nothing drastic, just adjustments that could make the exercises more comfortable for her. One afternoon, while Emily was asleep, Michael was in the mansion's basement organizing his tools when he found several dusty boxes. Curious, he opened one and froze. Inside the box were dozens of projects signed by Robert Johnson. Blueprints, electrical diagrams, innovation designs, all in his father's neat handwriting and stamped with Richard's company logo. One folder caught his attention: Child Rehabilitation Project, R. Johnson, 2003. Michael opened the file with trembling hands. Inside were detailed drawings of physical therapy equipment for children, with technical explanations on how to make the exercises more effective and less traumatic. His father had developed those projects 2 years before being fired, and from the drawings, Michael could see that several of the devices Emily used were based on those original ideas. "Did you find something interesting?" a voice asked behind him. Michael turned and saw Barbara coming down the basement stairs. "These projects, they're my father's." "I know," she said, sitting in an old chair. "Your father was an inventive genius. These projects revolutionized treatment for children with motor disabilities." "Then why was he fired?" Barbara took a deep breath. "Because he found out that Mr. Thompson's nephew was selling construction materials on the side. When your father threatened to report it, the nephew planted evidence in his house." "And did Mr. Thompson know about this?" "He suspected. But he chose to protect his family instead of seeking the truth." Michael felt a mix of anger and sadness. "My father spent the last years of his life trying to clear his name, and the guilty one was protected the whole time. I kept copies of all the documents that prove his innocence," Barbara said, "always hoping that one day justice could be served." "Why didn't you do it sooner?" "Because I needed the job. I'm a widow, Mr. Michael. This job supported my family for over 20 years. That night, Michael couldn't focus on anything else. He stayed up late looking at his father's projects, imagining what it would have been like if Robert had gotten the chance to see his ideas used to help children like Emily. The next day, he decided to test something. Based on one of his father's designs, he made a small modification to Emily's treadmill. Nothing that could cause harm, just an adjustment to the resistance system. The result was impressive. Emily was able to exercise longer and with less fatigue. Melissa noticed the difference immediately. "What did you do to the treadmill?" she asked. "Emily has never responded so well to the exercises. Just a small technical adjustment." "What kind of adjustment? These devices are regulated. Any modifications need approval." Michael realized he'd gotten himself into a tricky situation. "It was based on biomechanics research my father did." "Was your father a physical therapist?" "No, but he studied child rehabilitation extensively." Melissa was suspicious but couldn't deny the results. Emily was more enthusiastic and cooperative than ever. A few days later, while Michael was doing routine maintenance on the equipment, Richard walked into Emily's room. "How are things going here?" he asked. "Everything's working perfectly, Mr. Thompson." "Melissa told me you made some modification to the treadmill." Michael swallowed hard. "It was just a small adjustment." "What kind of adjustment?" "These machines cost a fortune and are imported. I don't want anyone touching them without authorization." "Daddy, Uncle Michael made the treadmill better," Emily interrupted. "Now I can walk longer without getting tired." Richard looked at his daughter and then at Michael. "Show me what you did." With trembling hands, Michael explained the modification. Richard listened silently, asking a few technical questions. To Michael's surprise, the businessman seemed to understand engineering quite well. "Where did you learn this technique?" Richard asked. "From my father." "Your father taught mechanics?" "He was an engineer. He developed several projects in pediatric rehabilitation." Richard's expression shifted slightly. "What kind of projects?" Michael hesitated. Should he mention the documents he'd found in the basement? He decided to be cautious. "Equipment for pediatric physical therapy. He always said he wanted to help children with motor limitations." "Interesting," Richard murmured. "And do you have access to those projects?" "Some of them, yes. I'd like to see them. If they're truly effective, maybe we can implement other improvements for Emily's equipment." That night, Michael talked to Jennifer about the situation. "Do you think I should show him your father's projects?" he asked as she rubbed her belly. "I don't know, honey. On one hand, it would honor Daddy's memory. On the other, I don't want that man benefiting from his work. But if it could help Emily, yeah, that's the problem. The girl isn't at fault for anything, and she really is improving with the modifications. Maybe it's God's way of making things right, using your father's work to help the daughter of the man who wronged him." The next morning, Michael brought copies of the projects to show Richard. The businessman studied the documents for over an hour, asking detailed questions about every technical aspect. "These designs are brilliant," he finally said. "Your father was truly a genius. Why didn't he patent these ideas?" "He was developing them at the company. He thought they'd be officially implemented." "And why weren't they?" Michael looked directly into Richard's eyes. "Because he was fired before finishing." An uncomfortable silence filled the office. Richard drummed his fingers on the desk for a few seconds. "Listen, about what happened with your father, sometimes business requires tough decisions. Tough decisions or unfair ones. I had a company to protect, employees who depended on me. I couldn't ignore evidence of dishonesty." "Planted evidence?" Michael muttered. "What did you say?" "Nothing, sir." Richard stood and walked to the window. "Regardless of the past, these projects could revolutionize Emily's treatment. I'm willing to invest in implementing them." "Under what conditions?" "We'd work as partners. You'd develop the equipment, I'd provide the resources, profits would be split." Michael was surprised by the offer. "You'd consider me a partner?" "I'd consider you a specialized collaborator, with a share in the results." It was an incredible opportunity, but Michael still felt uneasy. Accepting would mean working directly with the man who had destroyed his father. On the other hand, it was a chance to see Robert's dreams realized. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course, but don't take too long. Emily is improving quickly, and other parents of special needs children would want access to these advancements." That afternoon, while playing with Emily in the garden, Michael noticed how much more energetic and confident she was. In just 2 weeks, the small adjustments he'd made to her equipment had produced visible results. "Uncle Michael," she said, stopping her chair beside him, "why do you sometimes look sad?" "I'm not sad, Princess." "Yes, you are. I can see it. It's just like when I get sad because I can't walk like the other kids." The innocence of the little girl touched Michael's heart. "Sometimes I think about my daddy, who's already gone to heaven. Was he as good as you?" "He was very good and very smart." "Then he must be happy seeing you help me, right?" Those simple words made Michael see the situation from a different perspective. Maybe his father really would be happy knowing his projects were helping an innocent child. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. That night, he made his decision. He called Richard and accepted the partnership proposal. "Great," said the businessman. "We'll start by implementing all the modifications to Emily's equipment. If the results are positive, we'll expand to other cases." Over the following weeks, Michael worked tirelessly adapting his father's designs to Emily's specific needs. Each piece of equipment was modified based on Robert's studies, always focusing on comfort and exercise effectiveness. The results exceeded all expectations. Emily began showing significant improvements in motor coordination and muscle strength. Melissa was amazed by the progress. "In 15 years of practice, I've never seen a child respond so well to treatment," she said. "What you're doing is revolutionary." News of Emily's progress began spreading among the specialist doctors in Los Angeles. Other parents of children with motor limitations started reaching out to Richard, asking about the equipment. That's when Barbara appeared in Emily's room with a worried expression. "Mr. Michael, we need to talk," she said, "in private." They went to the garden, where Barbara made sure they were alone. "There's a problem," she said. "Dr. Stephen, Mr. Thompson's nephew, found out about the modified equipment." "And what's the issue?" "He wants to take credit for the innovations. He's claiming he developed the techniques while working at the company." Michael felt his blood boil. "But that's a lie." "I know it's a lie, you know it's a lie. But Dr. Stephen has influence and connections in the medical field. If he can prove the techniques were developed during his time at the company, he can claim the rights." "Does Richard know?" "Not yet, but Dr. Stephen is going to talk to him this afternoon." Michael spent the rest of the day in distress. Could history be repeating itself? Would the Johnson family once again be wronged by the same man who had ruined his father? By late afternoon, Richard called him into the office. With him was a well-dressed man in his 40s, wearing an arrogant smile. "Michael, this is my nephew, Dr. Stephen Thompson. He's a physical therapist specializing in pediatric rehabilitation." "Pleasure," said Stephen, not offering his hand. "Stephen told me something interesting," Richard continued. "He says the techniques you're using were developed by him when he worked at the company." "That's not true," Michael said. "These techniques were developed by my father, Robert Johnson." Stephen laughed dismissively. "Robert Johnson? The engineer who was fired for theft? He had no qualifications in physical therapy. My father studied pediatric rehabilitation for years. Studying and developing professional techniques are very different things," Stephen said. "I have a master's in the field and worked specifically with these concepts at the company." Richard looked confused. "Michael, can you prove these techniques were really developed by your father?" "I have the original designs with his signature and the dates." "Projects he had access to because he worked at the company," interrupted Stephen. "Where I was developing those techniques." "You were selling construction materials on the side," exploded Michael. "What did you say?" asked Richard, rising from his chair. "Your nephew was selling materials from the job site. My father found out and threatened to report him. That's why he planted evidence against my dad." Stephen turned red with anger. "That's slander. Uncle, are you really going to believe this? This Plumber?" "Barbara!" shouted Richard. The secretary appeared at the office door. "Barbara, you were at the company when Robert Johnson was fired. What do you know about these accusations?" Barbara looked at Michael, then at Stephen, and finally at Richard. For a moment, she seemed like a woman tired of carrying heavy secrets. "Mr. Thompson," she said in a trembling voice, "I kept documents from that time, documents that prove Robert Johnson was innocent." "What documents?" asked Richard. "Invoices for the materials that were sold, all signed by Dr. Stephen, inventory reports showing the discrepancies, and recordings." "Recordings?" "Back then, I recorded all the meetings on your orders. I have the recording of the conversation where Dr. Stephen admits to the scheme and asks to frame Robert." The silence in the office was deafening. Stephen was white as a sheet, and Richard seemed to have aged 10 years in seconds. "You have these recordings?" Richard asked hoarsely. "Yes, sir. And I kept copies of all of Robert's original designs dated before Dr. Stephen's work." Stephen tried to stand up to leave, but Richard stopped him. "Sit down," he said in an icy voice. "Barbara, bring those documents. Now." As Barbara left to retrieve the files, a tense silence filled the office. Michael stared at Stephen with a mix of anger and satisfaction. Finally, after 20 years, the truth would come out. "Uncle, you're not going to believe this bitter woman, are you?" Stephen tried. 20 years, Stephen," said Richard. 20 years I've carried the guilt of firing an innocent man. 20 years I've tried to justify that decision. But you protected the family. You did what had to be done. I protected you and destroyed an innocent family." Barbara returned with a box full of documents and an old tape recorder. She placed everything on Richard's desk. "This is the recording from the meeting on March 15th, 2004, she said, pressing play. Stephen's younger voice echoed through the office. "Uncle, you have to help me. I sold some materials on the side, but Robert found out. He'll report me if you don't do something." Richard's younger voice, "What do you want me to do?" "Fire him before he can say anything. Make up some story. I know where he lives. I can plant some evidence there." "Stephen, it's the only way, Uncle. If he reports me, it'll hurt the whole company and the family." "You care about the family, right?" Barbara stopped the recording. "There are 2 more hours of conversation, including the plan to frame Robert." Richard buried his head in his hands. Stephen had stood up and was pacing desperately. "Uncle, that was 20 years ago. I was young. I made a mistake." "A mistake?" Michael exploded. "You destroyed my father's life. He spent years trying to clear his name." "And I have to carry that guilt forever," Stephen shouted. "You don't know what it's like to live with remorse." "Remorse?" Richard lifted his head. "If you had remorse, you would have confessed long ago. And now, I'll lose everything over some old story?" "You've already lost," said Richard. "Get out of my house and out of my life." Stephen tried to argue further, but Richard was unmoved. Finally, he stormed out, slamming the door. When they were alone, Richard turned to Michael. "I don't even know where to begin apologizing," he said. "I ruined your father's life by protecting that thief." "My father never got over it," said Michael. "He died believing that one day the truth would come out. And it did. Thanks to you and Barbara." "Barbara, why did you hold on to that evidence for so long?" Michael asked. "Because I knew one day it would be necessary, and because I felt guilty for not having the courage to speak up sooner." Richard fell silent for a few minutes, processing everything. "Michael," he finally said, "I want to make peace with you and your father's memory. I'll publicly acknowledge his innocence and give him full credit for the rehabilitation projects." "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do. It's the least I can do after 20 years of injustice. What about Emily's equipment? The equipment will continue to be developed based on your father's designs, and you'll be recognized as the rightful developer of the techniques." That night, Michael came home with a mix of relief and sadness. Finally, the truth had come out, but his father was no longer there to see his honor restored. "How did it go?" asked Jennifer, noticing his expression. Michael told her everything that had happened. Jennifer cried when she heard about the evidence and Stephen's recorded confession. "Your father can rest in peace now," she said, hugging her husband. "Yeah, I just wish he were here to see it." In the following days, Richard kept his promise. He published a statement in local newspapers acknowledging Robert Johnson's innocence and publicly apologizing to the family. He also officially registered all the pediatric rehabilitation projects under Robert Johnson's name, with Michael as the legal heir to the rights. The impact was immediate. Several hospitals and rehabilitation clinics reached out, interested in the adapted equipment. Michael suddenly found himself at the center of a revolution in pediatric physical therapy. But what moved him most was seeing Emily's progress. The little girl was growing stronger and more confident every day. She had even begun taking a few supported steps, something doctors had said would be impossible just months before. "Uncle Michael," she said one day, "when I grow up, I'm going to help other kids just like you helped me." "Really, Princess?" "Yes, and I'll tell everyone that it was you and your daddy who invented the machines that made me better." 6 months later, Michael had become Richard's official partner in a new company dedicated to developing pediatric rehabilitation equipment. The first physical therapy center using Robert Johnson's techniques opened in Manhattan, with equipment donated to low-income families. At the opening ceremony, Emily, now walking with minimal support, cut the ribbon alongside Michael and Richard. A plaque at the entrance bore Robert Johnson's name as the original developer of the techniques and Michael Johnson as the developer of the equipment. Barbara, now promoted to administrative director of the new company, gave a speech about the importance of justice even if delayed. "Sometimes," she said, "fate has mysterious ways of putting the right people in the right place at the right time." Robert Johnson's story didn't end with his passing. It lives on through his son and all the children who will benefit from his brilliant ideas. Michael looked at Jennifer, now holding their baby. a boy they had named Robert in honor of his grandfather. He looked at Emily, smiling beside Richard, and he looked up at the sky, feeling that justice had finally been served. It wasn't just about money or recognition. It was about dignity, truth, and the human capacity for redemption. Richard had become a different man through that experience, and Michael had learned that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting, but rather transforming pain into something constructive. The final scene of the day was Emily teaching other children how to use the adapted equipment. She had become a little ambassador of hope, showing that physical limitations were no boundaries for dreams. "Uncle Michael," she said at the end of the day, "thank you for fixing my chair that day." "Thank you, Princess. You changed my life too." "How?" "You taught me that sometimes the best things in life come from the hardest moments." And so, a simple call to repair a wheelchair had turned into a story of redemption, justice, and hope. The legacy of Robert Johnson lived on, helping children overcome their limitations and families find hope where there had once been only despair. The company grew quickly, expanding to other states and developing new equipment based on Robert's original designs. Michael never forgot his roots as a plumber, always keeping the humility and willingness to help that he had learned from his father. And Emily kept improving, proving that with love, dedication, and the right tools, any child can overcome the greatest challenges. Her story became an inspiration for thousands of families, showing that hope should never be abandoned. Years later, when Emily took her first steps completely on her own, Michael was there to witness the miracle, and in that moment, he knew his father would have been proud, not just of the technical innovations, but most of all, of how the Johnson family had turned a great injustice into a force for good. The end. Tell us what you thought of this story of perseverance and forgiveness. Do you believe Michael made the right choice in forgiving Richard? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more heartwarming stories.